the most important things is the first step, which is just accessing the road to wisdom. So I know you mentioned that like you already did continuing membership education for your chapter, but I know that there might be people who aren't PTMs who show up to this workshop, so I just want to and walk through how to reach the road to wisdom. So if you go to the Kappa Kappa Psi national website, which is right here, you will see a screen that looks like this right here. And if you scroll over on this menu bar to membership and scroll over membership, you'll see this one of the road to wisdom. So it's really easy to find on the website. And once you click that and click the Vice President of Membership tab, you will see access the road to wisdom. So there's 3 things you'll see once you access the road to wisdom. And that's the Vice President of Membership Teaching Manual, the Membership Candidate Guidebook, and the Registration Form and Policy Agreement. So the main thing we're going to talk about today is going to be within the Membership Teaching Manual. And you don't need to pull this up for the workshop or anything like that. I've got like screen caps of what we're going to talk about today. But for later on, when you want to access this on your own, you'll click on the President of Membership, Vice President of Membership Teaching Manual, and you'll be able to go through the lessons, see the lesson plans, guiding questions, and other stuff like that. So step 2, examine. After accessing the road to wisdom, it is time to consider the lessons that you have available to you and how best to use them for in this workshop in a few minutes, I'm going to go over a couple lessons that are a good catch-all sort of to use in your CME. Specifically, we're going to walk through lesson 3, your chapter matters, but as 3 separate sections and how you can use those at different times in your chapter to really improve that aspect of your chapter. And we'll talk more on that in just a minute. So when examining the lessons, really take time to consider what's going on in your chapter at that time. That's, like I mentioned earlier, one of the best things about CME. There's plenty of room to cater to exactly what your chapter needs, and it helps your weak spots to become strong spots, like I mentioned earlier with the fellowship example. If your chapter struggles with enthusiasm for service projects, you can do a CME lesson on the value and importance of your service projects. That also gives you the opportunity to try and reinvigorate your chapter about what the precepts of Kappa Kappa Psi are, our 5 purposes, the creed, and to really just re-garner that motivation to really like continue in what we do. Because I think everyone in this room has had a service project that they were really excited for, and then it might not have panned out just the way you hoped. So when you have that lack of motivation in a chapter, it's really important to make sure that as your chapter membership education officer, that you take that time to really like push that forwards and like continue the growth from having a downfall like that, and not to get stuck in a rut. So step 3 is to apply. After you've selected a lesson to teach, consider how you'll present that lesson to your chapter. This can be done at a meeting, as a separate event, after band rehearsal. The possibilities are really endless, and it really depends on what works best for your chapter. In my chapter, personally, we did CME as a small committee after MEP, and we take 5 to 15 minutes out of our chapter meeting for the CME lesson. And depending on how you want to do that, it can be totally different. So, Jasmine, how did you guys do CME at Kennesaw?
So at first, what we would do is I kind of like came up with a lesson plan for like the program for the year. And so I knew that I wanted to include like specific lessons about like goal setting, strategic planning, and then maybe some stuff about the ritual. And then I would like organize that in a calendar throughout the year. And so we do like once a month. But recently we changed our meeting structure so that way we only have like 2 business meetings per month. And then the other 2 meetings will either do like a workshop meeting. So that's basically anything that goes from music workshops to specific like continuing membership education stuff to like stuff about our governing documents, really any of those. And so we will have people, either the continuing membership educator will submit a workshop for that, or people in the brotherhood can submit a workshop for that. And then the executive board will like look over them to make sure that they're good to go, and then they're allowed to present. So this year, I think that the second method has worked a lot better because people are able to give their input and what they want, what they think is good for our continuing membership education, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But then also we have like a set person who has their own continuing membership education like plan for the year.
That's great. Hello, welcome back to the meeting. What about you, Jordan, from Alpha Eta or Bree? Either of y'all? Okay, well, you can come back in a few minutes, but I think that really just shows like how many different ways there are to do membership education. Like Jasmine mentioned, they changed their meeting structure to have like one workshop block per 2 workshop blocks per month with 2 business meetings. So that way they were able to have more time for CME in their chapter. So it's also really important to think about how often you will do CME. It's best not to use it like as a bandage when there's a problem or as a crutch. It's not an antibiotic for when your chapter is sick, but it's a vitamin to like help you stay strong. It's not an emergency. It's a chance to really like continue to grow and develop your values. So now I want to go through one of the lessons. And so we're gonna sort of like teach the lesson and walk through it together as a group. So after accessing the road to wisdom, I chose to look at lesson 3, Your Chapter Matters, as an example for this workshop. I'm going to divide it into 3 mini lessons for different chapter needs. So first will be a lesson on OMRS, then a lesson on elections, and finally a lesson on unity and support. And what's great about this is that you have you have 2 anytime lessons and also 1 specific lesson. Hello? Did someone have a question? Okay, I just thought I heard someone, so I want to make sure. Speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, so it's broken up into lesson 3A, 3B, and 3C, and it's all part of the Your Chapter Matters section in the Road to Wisdom. So lesson 3 focuses on OMRS, your chapter constitution, and the election and installation of officers. And so let's start by breaking it, lesson 3, into, this should say 3, and I'm sorry that this is a mistake in my PowerPoint, into 3 short CME lessons that are each going to take about 10 minutes to complete. So 3A is going to focus on the structure of OMRS. Every chapter in the nation submits reports, and every brother has access to OMRS, but often a lot of brothers don't really know how to use the OMRS system. And I know that this is a part of the Road to Wisdom, which is where we're pulling some of this from, but even like new membership candidates, after only seeing it one time, just don't have they're not exposed to it as much as they need to be, and really giving them a hands-on chance in chapter meetings to pull up their account, update their information, because that's very valuable for the district and national officers as well, just so they can access everyone and make sure everything is set up, is a really great chance to really just walk through OMRS with your new membership candidates once they're initiated as full brothers. So taking up just a few minutes to pull up OMRS and remind everyone of how to use it and its functionality is really great for lots of chapters because it helps you to understand the inner workings of the chapter. I know for a fact when I joined Kappa Kappa Psi, I didn't really think about how in-depth it would be with as many reports we have to fill out and just how much information goes into that, including treasury information, MEP information, service information. And so being able to divvy that up to different brothers in your chapter really helps to ease that burden off whoever is going to be submitting your form, typically your president. So just being able to really understand what goes into a report really helps with that completion process. So continuing, when teaching this lesson to your chapter, it's really important to focus on it being for everyone. Most of your executive board is already familiar with using OMRS because there's so many forms to complete during the year, like I mentioned a minute ago. So it's important to really use this lesson to help everyone else really understand what goes into OMRS and how they can use it to better understand the fraternity and also like what their chapter specifically does. One thing I think is really important to think about here is in like the learning outcomes. So brothers will be comfortable using OMRS to search for forms, chapters, and recall previous submissions. And honestly, for me, learning to recall previous submissions was like the most amazing thing. When I first became president of my chapter, I had never submitted a fall activity report or a chapter summary report. So being able to go back and look at what my chapter had done in the past really helped me to understand what I needed to do and gather for the forms. So making that accessible again and like reminding other people of how to do that is really useful, not just for filling out forms, but if there's a service project your chapter hasn't done since like 2014, that was really awesome. There's no reason not to do it again. And looking back at some of that chapter history can really help to like push your chapter forwards again. And also, brothers will be knowledgeable of everything that goes into making the chapter successful at a basic level. And like I said, that really is tied in very heavily with the forms. So 3B focuses on elections. And I suggest that like you teach 3B and 3C sort of in succession. So you'd have 3B 2 weeks before your elections, and then maybe 3C the week before your elections. And I'll explain why as we continue going. So every chapter has elections, and every chapter does their elections differently. So it's important to take the time prior to your elections to really go over your chapter constitution so your brothers and your newly initiated membership candidates understand your election process. It's also a really good time to discuss officer duties again and consider having an option for shadowing of officers, because at this time in the Road to Wisdom, it's when your membership candidates will get the chance to elect their own class officers. But as active brothers, it's an opportunity for you to work very closely with the officer who you'll be working, whose office you would like to run for, excuse me. So you know more about their position than just what's constitutionally said. So an example of that for me is that my chapter, our vice president of membership, is not constitutionally required to do CME. But traditionally that's something that they've added in and done as part of their job. So if you were running for vice president of my chapter and you thought the only things you would have to do are what's constitutionally required, you might be surprised to find out that there is an expectation that you would also continue doing CME. So the reason I suggested doing 3B and then 3C in succession are because 3B, like I mentioned just now, focuses a lot on elections and helps you to understand the election process, whereas 3C focuses very heavily on the installation of officers. And the installation of officer ceremony is very, it talks a lot about unity between your chapter and trust and like faith in that process. So as you're giving the oath of support and the oath of office, you're really binding yourselves together as a chapter to really do your best and support one another to be successful in the coming year. So to go over again, like the learning outcomes you would want from 3B, you hope your brothers will understand their specific election procedures and feel confident in their knowledge of what each officer does, excuse me. Brothers will also have specific knowledge about an office that they're interested in running in outside of what is specified in the chapter constitution. And so here's like my VPM example from a minute ago. And I know a lot of other chapters have things that are sort of like not set in stone, but are sort of something that that officer will do as well. So one thing that I really wanted to talk about was 3C, and that's officer installation. And I really think this is one of like the most important ceremonies in Kappa Kappa Psi. And there's just something really special about that moment at like district convention or national convention where everyone gives the oath of office. Well, the officers give the oath of office and the brothers assembled give the oath of support. And so one thing when you run for an office, you're probably not going to run unopposed. And in a lot of chapters, that can create a lot of tension over who might support who for a different office. And with the officer installation ceremony discussion, it really helps to remind your chapter that we're all brothers, regardless of the outcome, and we always support and love one another. And so in this mini lesson, you should discuss the officer installation ceremony with the oath of office and the oath of support. So I have those three here pulled from the Road to Wisdom, and I'm gonna try and move this. Okay. So I highlighted a couple sections that are, some of these are also highlighted in the Road to Wisdom that I just wanted to work through and like analyze as a group together to really sort of like talk about what they mean. So one of the first things that is said is that your chapter of Kappa Kappa Psi has seen fit to entrust its fortunes into your hands for the coming term of office. This is a really important thing for new officers because it really sort of like shows like the weight and the magnitude of what is expected of you now that you've taken this office. It's not a joke for a lot of people. This is a really serious matter because this is a fraternity we all care about and really love. And so this is both an honor bestowed and a privilege granted. And that also really just adds to that strength of what this means for you as an officer. So continuing on, you willingly commit yourselves to whatever toil and sacrifice is necessary in the interest of the fraternity and to the fostering of its ideals. To shirk is to betray a trust. So this is shirking from the duties that like you are given as an officer, and you're really betraying the trust of the chapter when you turn your head away from what you really should be doing for your chapter. And this section really serves to remind, again, that you are representing and supporting your chapter, and that your chapter really feels that you are the best person to serve in this office and really do it the best way possible. And that's echoed again as your brothers believe that you are capable of performing them with distinction and will diligently support your administration. I think that's a really, really important section, because when you have two people running for the same office, and I mentioned earlier, it's easy for there to be tension created in a chapter, but at the end of the day, you have to realize that you have put your trust in your chapter and your faith when you run for office, that they will select the person who's best suited for the position. So one of the major goals of this 3C lesson is to really like help ease that tension that can be created during the election process, to remind everyone that we are a unified force, we are a fraternity, we are brothers, and at the end of the day, we will choose the people we think will be able to serve the office the best and who we think will really be able to support us in the end. And so the second section over here in the middle is the oath of office. So in accepting this office, I solemnly promise without reservation to devote sufficient of my time and energies to fulfill all obligations placed upon me in the pursuance of my duties. This is not an easy thing to promise a lot of the time. All of us are in college and all of us are busy. And so to really like bind yourself as the first thing you do in office, to bind yourself and your time to doing every single thing you can to improve your chapter, it's not always an easy thing to do. And so one thing to really talk about in 3C is just like remembering just how important and like how vital it is that as an officer, you do everything you can to help your chapter be the best it can possibly be. So continuing, I hereby reaffirm my ritualistic vows and rededicate myself to the promotion of the ideals of the fraternity, the maintenance of its traditions, and the preservation of its honor. And this is something all of us have heard multiple times, but it's always worth repeating just to remember and remind yourself what you're doing this for. And continuing on as it transitions into the oath of support is a section that reads, even the most intelligent and dedicated leaders would be powerless without the loyal support and cooperation of the members within it. And this reminds us a lot of different, excuse me, but it reminds us a lot of how important it is that we support our officers. If you're the president of your chapter and you want everyone to run a marathon or something by the end of the year, but your brothers don't want to do that, you're really going to struggle to have really any power in making them run a marathon at all, because they're their own independent people. But with the support of your chapter, you can all run a marathon by the end of the year maybe. And so having that cooperation and that support from your brothers is very, very vital to the continued success of a chapter. So it's again mentioned that it is your duty to assist your officers in working towards the goals which animate us all. And again, that just calls back again to our 5 purposes, just to remind again what the officers have sworn to do. And so again, one of the major themes here is unity. And one section that emphasizes that is that I will endeavor to work with the brothers and officers of this chapter to the best of my ability and in the best interest of the fraternity. So with that, even if you weren't elected for an office, you know that you have to continue to work with those people and that you will do everything you can to help support them and support your chapter. At the end of the day, we're all brothers. And I know I've harped on that a lot today, but I think it's one of like the really key parts of chapters and like chapter success and democracy. So again, we have the same solemn promise without reservation that we saw in the oath of office, and that they will at all times apply their efforts and energies in the best interest of our university and college band. So here I went back through a lot of the language we already went through, so we can kind of like move more quickly through that since we covered that a second ago. But does anyone have something that they would like to share about the about themes of like unity and stuff and the oath of office or oath of support?
Yeah, I think I think they're both very important, like you said, Jillian. I think that often we get so bogged down in our leaders into saying, oh, well, they didn't do this. Oh, well, why didn't they do it this way? When really maybe we can offer that constructively. Maybe we can offer that in a way that grows the leader instead of tearing them down, because that is our job as brothers, is to build each other up. But on the flip side of that, we have a responsibility if we are in that position. And, you have to fulfill that responsibility. And I think that having the nice balance between those really makes, everybody more comfortable with people who are in leadership. And if you are the leader in leadership, and more welcoming in that way.
Definitely. I think that's a really great point to bring up.
Can I say something?
Of course.
So I'm in like this group therapy program thing. It's called The Daring Way by Brene Brown, if any of you guys know the work that she does. But basically something that's kind of relevant with that is the importance of self-compassion and empathy. And so I think as leaders, sometimes like we're all students, or maybe we're not, like you have jobs, you have things, responsibilities outside of just Kappa Kappa Psi, and you sometimes can't get to everything. So when you mess up, I think it's really important to have that self-compassion piece and be able to forgive yourself and apologize to other people. And then when we're supporting our leaders, it's important to have empathy for them. And like, if we were in their position, know that we wouldn't be perfect either, and forgive them for the times that they maybe didn't uphold the responsibilities in the way that they should have.
That's a really great point to add as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Does anyone else have something they want to add right now as well? Okay. So I'm going to move on a little from these analyses. I kind of just had them here in case like someone wanted the slides or something, because like I can't always be there to talk or something. But that's basically everything that I've already covered. So the learning outcomes for 3C are that brothers are aware of the magnitude of running for office, and that tensions are eased both going into and after elections. I spoke with a brother a few weeks ago who reached out to me to talk about elections in their chapter, and I mentioned that like in my chapter we've worked really hard to make sure that like no one feels like their feet are stepped on, and that they understand that like when we vote for people, we're voting unbiased as far as like who's friends with who, but because we truly think this person is the best person for the job. And she mentioned that like she really wished that like her chapter could have that sort of like unity and that sort of like compassion for one another, to not feel so defeated and broken down if they weren't selected for an office and feel like the chapter was just against them, when sometimes it's that the chapter felt like they would be better served in a different position, or that what they're doing right now is really important for the fraternity already. So hopefully brothers will be reminded that chapter elections are for the continued strength of the chapter and not a vote for your friend competition. Brothers who are not successful in running for office do not feel discouraged by their loss. And I think this is a really important part, because when you run for office, you really put yourself out there to your chapter, to your district, to the national convention. You're asked hard questions that you have to have answers to, and it takes a really big leap of faith. And to have that sort of dedication to run for an office is definitely not a characteristic in a brother that you want to lose. If a brother runs their sophomore year and they don't become the president because someone else with more experience runs against them, that's not a sign that they should never run again. That's a sign they should run again next year. So one thing that I really want to harp on here as well is just that if you run for office and you don't get it, definitely run again and continue to strive like for the highest and hope for the best for yourself and for your chapter. And so with that, it's also really important to like remind that even if you aren't serving in an officer position, you can still be a leader and a servant to your band. So finally, I just want to talk about like applying this like strategy to other lessons. So, all brothers know like AEA, strive for the highest, and you can also use it to strive for the highest in your CME lessons. Just remember, access, examine, apply, AEA. And so to take that to like any of the lessons for the Road to Wisdom, you can really take that strategy and create your own miniature lessons or your own variation that is specifically relatable to your chapter or a specific issue that your chapter's been having. So that's sort of the end. But I'd like to take the rest of our time to sort of like discuss like ideas for CME and like if there's any questions you have for me that I could answer for you. Oh, where'd Zoom go? My desktop is ugly, I'm sorry.
Jasmine, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I guess we recently used some of the workshop on the second degree from, is it the inner circle? Yeah,
Mhm.
so I think incorporating like a lot of the resources from nationals, that's kind of what I did. I used a lot of the leadership and communication, conflict resolution information from past conventions, but also from like a really old guide to leadership. I think it was from like 2007. And so kind of just like doing, I don't know, I'm a psych major, so anytime I think of implementing something, I'm always like research first, gather all of the necessary resources, and then like create something based off of that. So I know like what I'm saying isn't just like pulling it out of thin air,
Yeah,
So
for sure.
I just like using lots of different sources of information.
Definitely. And I think the inner circle is going to be coming out officially in the spring, right? And I'm very excited for that. I think it's going to be a really, really great resource, especially for CME, since so many people do end up having questions about the ritual. But since this isn't a protected meeting, we're not going to really get into that. But I do think it's going to be really valuable for a lot of brothers, and I'm really excited to see how people are going to be using it. Yeah.
I think something about CME that a lot of chapters should consider is creating a officer position for it. So a lot of chapters like to do where the VPM does the CME, but the VPM has so much to do that I feel like, one, it fosters more leadership to have another position, because that allows another person to maybe enter an appointed position at a younger age and then maybe be VPM one day. So I think it fosters leadership in that way. I think it also opens up the chapter's eyes to someone else and their thoughts on a more specialized platform, which is always great. And then it just gives the chapter the opportunity to have someone who's dedicated to that subject. Okay, so I think that whenever we have someone directed to PRO, there's so much more that goes on. Public relations officer. Gotcha. I saw your face. When we have someone that's dedicated to the social media, you see a lot more on the social media. So I think that is the same idea with CME, that if we have someone dedicated to maybe making a 10-minute workshop every chapter, or every other chapter, or however it may be, or whatever your chapter decides on, you're able to foster those ideas more and foster that leadership and really give someone the chance to grow as well as the chapter to grow. And then by having that set position, it's something for people to apply to look forward to, and to, I think one of the greatest aspects is that if you really connect the CME to VPM, you start having growth in interest for membership, which can look wonderful once you get to VPM, because that person has already been interacting with the Road to Wisdom very closely, or whatever CME program that has existed. So then that brings them to a closer relationship with membership that really can give them the skills and the knowledge that they need to be a great VPM. Yeah.
Definitely. I know once our chapter started doing CME very regularly, there was a really noticeable increase in like enthusiasm and participation in different service projects or just ideas. So I know I remember my freshman and sophomore year, I wasn't as convinced by the powers of CME as I am today. But when you implement it well into your chapter and you take the time to really make sure that it's relatable to what you're doing, it can really have a strong impact in how your chapter functions as at large.
Yeah. I think another thing also is the way that you present it. It doesn't always have to look like, you know, going to a workshop where it's just a bunch of lecturing. It could look like different activities that could foster bonding, or like games. It could look like, I know our TBS chapter, they do yoga sometimes together as part of their CME program. So I think that when you give the people who sometimes maybe don't get as much of an opportunity to share their ideas, like to speak up, and then you encourage that, then you'll also see the growth that you saw in your chapter.
Definitely, I agree. Like you mentioned with that, I'm sorry, I just completely blanked. I got up really early. I'm sorry. But all in all, CME is a really valuable resource. So I hope that you all will take some of this like back to your chapters. And this was just one way to do it, just to like use the Road to Wisdom as sort of like a starting point. But when you're able to really like take the time to like create your own lessons and really be specific to your chapter with activities, you can really create something really powerful. So I hope that this has opened a couple doors for some of you, or like given you some more ideas that you can bring back to your chapters, because I know we're about to run out of time.
Yes, thank you. Would it be possible for you to share your PowerPoint?
Of course.
Okay, cool.
Yes. Can I give you my email, or you give me your email, you know?
Yes. I'll just put it in the chat right now in case anyone else wants it.
Okay.
Beautiful. So yes. Can we all take a picture? We're taking a picture at every workshop. Jordan. I know she has some. There she is. Okay, hold on. Let me close this chat bubble. There we go. All right, everybody smile on 1, 2, 3. Cool. We will share all these pictures and everything and all these resources. But yeah, thank you, Jillian.
Yeah, thank you guys for being here. I took a picture of the email, so I'll send that to everyone tonight, and I will also fix my 2 typos before you have it for yourself, because that was a oversight on my part. But I hope you all enjoyed. And if you ever have questions about anything membership, you can contact me at sedvpm@kksci.org, or you can have my regular email or my phone number. It doesn't really matter. I'm here to serve you guys however I can.
Thanks.
Yeah.
See you.
Y'all have a good day.
You too.
Good presentation.